Hey everyone, we know how hard it can be to keep up with the latest news in Israel, so if you haven't had the time to stay on top of what's what in the Holy Land with ILTV, have no worries. It's time for our new show this week in Israel, where we'll give you the scoop on everything you need to know about the last 7 days right from Tel Aviv. I'm Natasha Kirchuk, here to keep you informed.
The tensions in Jerusalem are higher than ever as Muslims are now boycotting the Temple Mount compound. The protests are following the installation of new metal detectors and security cameras at the entrances to the Temple Mount in response to Friday's terror attack that killed 2 Israeli police officers. Israeli police have also since searched the Temple Mount for weapons, and while they didn't find caches of live ammunition, they did find knives, munitions, and even stun grenades. The Islamic Waqf, which oversees the Temple Mount, has called for a boycott of the Al-Aqsa Temple Mount compound over the new security measures, and it seems like most Palestinians are on board with the move. While a few Muslims have ignored the call to protest and are passing through the metal detectors to pray at the Dome of the Rock as normal, many are now praying outside the gates of the Temple Mount and even in the streets.
مش رفضوا بدهم لك تقدر تخشي بس عن طريق البوابة الإلكترونية هذا الحكي ما بيتمش علينا احنا.
In addition to the boycott, Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas's Fatah movement is calling for a day of rage today over the security measures, which they're arguing is a form of collective punishment that impedes their freedom of worship. They even want the world to force Israel to remove the metal detectors, which are a common sight in Israel. People going to the Western Wall and even to the mall or a bus terminal must pass through them.
وإننا باسم القيادة الفلسطينية وعلى رأسها فخامة الأخ الرئيس محمود عباس والحكومة الفلسطينية وباسم كل شعبنا المرابط في القدس وفي كل مكان نرفض كل هذه الإجراءات الخطيرة والتي من شأنها منع حرية العبادة وإعاقة حركة المصلين وفرض العقوبات الجماعية والفردية على أبناء شعبنا وانتهاك حق الوصول إلى الأماكن المقدسة والمساسي بحق ممارسة الشعائر الدينية.
The Israeli authorities say that the new security measures are necessary to ensure the security of all visitors at the Temple Mount.
There are security measures that have been implemented, metal detectors as well as CCTV cameras that are being used, and the security measures will continue as long as necessary in order to make sure that the Temple Mount is safe and the areas are safe for individuals to walk around.
Earlier today, Israeli police closed off the Temple Mount to Jews, claiming that a group of Jews had breached the rules of conduct. Jews are forbidden from praying at the Temple Mount, which is the holiest site in the Jewish faith. In related news, another riot around the Temple Mount broke out last night over the new security measures installed at the Muslim entrances to the compound. The clashes last night led to the hospitalization of around 16 people, including 2 Israeli police officers. Last night, after evening prayers were held outside the Temple Mount, a group of Arabs began throwing rocks and bottles at the police guarding the old city, necessitating the use of stun grenades and rubber bullets to break up the riot. According to the Red Crescent, up to 34 people were injured in the riots. The Jerusalem police say quiet was restored to the area afterwards, but the unrest in the old city of Jerusalem has been continual since Friday's terror attack on the Temple Mount, which killed 2 Israeli police officers. New Israeli security measures around the holy site have provoked outrage from the Jordanian Islamic Waqf and the Palestinian Fatah movement. The Waqf has been calling for Muslim worshippers to boycott the Temple Mount until the metal detectors are gone, and Fatah has called for a day of rage against Israel today. But Jerusalem Palestinians don't need any encouragement.
هذه البوابات السياسية التي يريد منها الاحتلال أن نعتاد على ما يريد أن يقوم به من تغيير واقع المسجد الأقصى المبارك، فلذلك لن أدخل وأرفض الدخول سأبقى أصلي في أقرب نقطة حتى تزال هذه بوابات.
Late last night, the White House finally released a statement over the ongoing conflict at the Temple Mount compound, requesting that Israeli and Jordanian officials figure out a way to restore calm. ILTV's Aaron Porras is here with more on that story. Now, Aaron, why is the U.S. throwing its hat into the draw here?
Basically, the United States has seen itself as this peacekeeping, moderating force globally for a very long time. And in addition to that, especially in the Middle East and with Israel, where a lot of American interests lie. Now, add to that the fact that a peace plan in the Middle East is a major tenet, is a major facet of the Trump administration, then, this major feud on the Temple Mount makes that pretty much impossible, so that it makes it their business.
Well, let's check out your report for some more details.
The White House press office, in a statement released yesterday, said that the United States is very concerned about the tensions at the Temple Mount and that Jordan and Israel must come to a solution that assures public safety and the security of the site and maintains the status quo. Unfortunately, the current situation is anything but status quo. Status quo is where, among other things, there are no metal detectors at the compound's Muslim-only entrances, no security cameras, full control under the Jordanian Waqf, and no open prayer by any non-Muslims. The Waqf has called on Muslims to boycott the compound, and the PA incited a day of rage yesterday. The new security measures were installed in response to a terror attack last weekend, where 3 Israeli Arabs attacked a group of police officers, killing 2 of them. Despite the new security, though, Netanyahu sees no real issues, saying, quote, "We want to solve the crisis in the quietest way possible and to bring back the calm. We talk with the Arab world and we explain that there is absolutely no change to the status quo," end quote.
The Israeli government is now planning to expand the same egalitarian prayer space at the Western Wall that was frozen from taking place last month. But here's the catch. Liberal Jewish denominations will not be in charge of the holy space. Instead, the Orthodox rabbinate will be taking the reins. Last year, a compromise to expand the mixed-gender prayer space along the Western Wall was approved, but last month it was suddenly frozen by the Israeli government following major outrage by Israel's Orthodox community. The main stickling point that led to the freeze was the language about liberal denominations controlling and administering the prayer space. The Orthodox rabbinate and Haredi parties in the government coalition saw this as an unacceptable change to the status quo. And now the government is moving forward with an expansion of the egalitarian Robinson's Arch prayer site and has already allocated more than $5 million for the upgrades. Along with that, they're requesting that the Supreme Court dismiss the case that the liberal Jewish denominations and Women of the Wall have brought to the Supreme Court. Anat Hoffman, the chairwoman of Women of the Wall, is calling for either the original agreement to be enforced or for an egalitarian section to be added to the current Western Wall plaza. She says that she's not buying the substitute agreement.
The United States and Russia have finished brokering a ceasefire agreement in southern Syria, and Israel is coming out hard against it, saying it does nowhere near enough to restrain the Islamic Republic of Iran. In Paris yesterday, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu was vocally critical of the ceasefire, telling journalists that the agreement just helps Iran set up a hostile presence on Israel's northern border. While the plan does have language about keeping Iran 12 miles or 20 kilometers from Israel's borders, it doesn't explicitly mention preventing Iranian expansionist agendas, i.e., it doesn't interfere with Iranian plans for a land route linking Lebanon to Iran through Syria and Iraq, nor does it prevent the establishment of naval and/or air force bases. Netanyahu says that he discussed his issues with the terms of the ceasefire with French President Emmanuel Macron. Senior Israeli officials have also been vocally critical of the deal, describing it as very bad. This is not the first ceasefire in Syrian civil war, and it's unclear how long this one will last for. Previous ceasefires have lasted a few days or a few weeks, but never longer than that.
Israel's been hoping for a more aggressive U.S. policy toward the Islamic Republic of Iran, and the White House certification that Iran is in compliance with the JCPOA is not a great sign, although new U.S. sanctions on Iran send a different message. ILTV's Max Keisler is here with more details on this story. Now, Max, what is the Trump administration's policy towards Iran right now?
Well, it's still being figured out. This is obviously not an administration that's friendly to Iran. They've got great ties with Israel and Saudi Arabia. On the other hand, a lot of the decision makers in the White House don't really want to take drastic action. So what we're seeing here is the middle ground. On the one hand, keeping the deal intact. On the other hand, new sanctions on the Islamic Republic.
And what is Israel's reaction to these sorts of changes that we're seeing all the time?
I think Israel's very happy to have a White House that shares their view of Iran, that this is an expansionist threat. At the same time, they'd love to see more action and not just words. I think when it comes to Syria, Iraq, the nuclear program, Israel would like to see something more than just sanctions.
Absolutely. Well, let's check out your report. Sorry.
At the last minute, the U.S. decided to continue on with the 2015 Iran deal, and it's raising questions in Jerusalem as to just how the U.S. intends to counter Iranian military expansion in the Middle East. It wasn't until Monday afternoon that the Trump administration decided to tell Congress that Iran was in compliance with the, quote, Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. U.S. President Donald Trump has expressed deep skepticism toward the Iran deal, which he has dubbed the worst deal ever, and more broadly toward the Islamic Republic of Iran, which he views as a state sponsor of terrorism. Reportedly, Secretary of State Rex Tillerson pushed Trump to certify Iranian compliance, but the president nearly called it off. just before the deadline, which would have triggered a 60-day period for Congress to reimpose heavy sanctions on Iran. Israel sees Iran as the primary threat to its security, as the Islamic Republic provides hundreds of thousands of rockets to Hezbollah in Iran and regularly threatens to destroy the state. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says that the recent ceasefire in southern Syria, negotiated by the US and Russia, fails to check Iranian ambitions.
For years, Israel has been saying that the United Nations peacekeeping forces in Lebanon have been doing nothing to prevent Hezbollah from rearming itself for its next war with Israel. And now it looks like U.S. Ambassador to the UN, Nikki Haley, agrees. Haley held a meeting with the UN envoy for Lebanon, Sigrid Kaag, in anticipation of the UN Security Council meeting today. They were set to discuss how and if the UN peacekeeping force is fulfilling its directive. According to a statement put out by the U.S., Haley expressed alarm over the buildup of weapons by Hezbollah and stressed that the international community must apply more pressure on Hezbollah. Israeli intelligence believes that Hezbollah has over 100,000 missiles all across southern Lebanon in the basements of homes and hospitals. Iran has even constructed missile factories in Lebanon, according to Arabic media. In June, Haley went on a tour of the Israeli-Lebanon border with an IDF major general who got into a heated argument with the commander of UNIFIL over their failure to disarm Hezbollah. All right, Vice President Mike Pence has just reiterated President Trump's campaign promises to move the American embassy to Jerusalem at a conference for Christians United for Israel. To the men and women of Christians United for Israel, this president hears you. This president stands with you. And I promise you that the day will come when President Donald Trump moves the American embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. It's not a question of if, it's only when. This isn't the first time that Pence has made that promise, but there haven't been any actual promising moves as of yet. Just last month, the president renewed a biannual waiver started in 1995 that postpones the move, just like all of his predecessors have done since President Bill Clinton. Pence remains adamant, though, and isn't just promising that the president will make good on his word about the embassy, but that Israel's continued well-being is paramount to the American administration. It looks like the Trump administration is joining in to back up a bill that would drastically cut U.S. funding to the Palestinian Authority until the PA stops inciting and subsidizing terrorism. Not only has a president's special envoy to the Middle East met with the chair of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee to discuss the progress of the legislation, an administration official is saying that the White House agrees with the high-level goals of the Taylor Force Act. There's been speculation that the White House was ambivalent about the bill since they've been so focused on restarting Israeli-Palestinian negotiations. But apparently that's not the case. The bill will be voted on in the Senate Foreign Relations Committee before the Senate recesses on August 22nd. It's named after Taylor Force, a U.S. Army veteran who was stabbed to death by a Palestinian terrorist in Tel Aviv. Here's some startling news in Jerusalem. The city's district court has been hearing the testimonies of Palestinians who were brutally tortured by the Palestinian Authority for being suspected collaborators with Israel. The court is ruling that the Palestinian Authority must pay compensation to the people it tortured between 1990 and 2003. Some of the plaintiffs were held for years, locked inside hot metal containers, had their teeth pulled out, and were even rendered sterile and impotent by genital torture. The ruling comes after 90 court sessions and many years of deliberations, and Israeli Judge Moshe Drori says the testimonies and evidence prove beyond any reasonable doubt that the allegations are true. Next, the court will look through every one of the 51 cases and determine how much each victim should be awarded as compensation for their years of torture. But according to one of the men who was tortured, that won't get him his life back. He says he's already lost it since he was arrested at the age of 18 or 19. He's been living in Israel alone and penniless since he was released.
The Israeli Defense Forces chief education officer has ordered that from now on, only uniformed soldiers will be able to give other soldiers tours of the West Bank, and settlement leaders are saying this is an attempt to drive a wedge between residents of Judea and Samaria and other Israelis. ILTV's Max Keisler is back with more. Max, what is the settlements leaders' reasons here? What are their reasons here?
Well, there have been times when relations between the settlers and the army have been very tense, particularly around the times when the army has dismantled major settlement blocks. These educational tours were a way for them to build bridges with the soldiers who might be stationed there for years. Now this is gone, I think they're worried about increased tensions.
All right, well, We'll have to hear more.
Avner Paltsuk, the chief education officer of the IDF, says that due to the disputed territories' deep complexity and sensitivity, he's ending the practice of Israeli settlers giving soldiers educational tours of the region. Many settlers of the West Bank follow the tenets of religious Zionism and see residing in the historical biblical heartland of the Jewish people as both a spiritual and an anti-imperialist act. But left-wing Israeli NGOs are alleging that settler-run educational tours for new recruits compromise the IDF's political neutrality. The leader of the Kfar Tzion Field School says that tours for soldiers at sites like the Yitzhak Rabin Center are equally politically sensitive. And the leader of the Samaria Regional Council, Yossi Dagan, says that the army order is a, quote, communist Russia-style decision meant to increase tensions between settlers and the IDF.
The Israeli Housing Ministry is now planning on offering public housing beyond the Green Line, and it's all in an effort to help low-income families while strengthening Israel's hold on Jerusalem. Housing Minister Gallant has just announced the move. The new apartments lie in many neighborhoods, including disputed areas like Pisgat Ze'ev and Neve Yaakov. Gallant is known for his belief in Jewish and Arab coexistence, having written op-eds for the New York Times on the subject and traveled to Arab-Israeli villages with the head of the Arab Joint List parties. It may be that this move will help to integrate Jerusalem, but it could also draw controversy from bodies like the UN and EU, which view Jewish expansion into disputed parts of Jerusalem as illegitimate. Recently, right-wing members of the government's coalition have been pushing a bill that would require the support of 2/3 of the Knesset to in any way divide Jerusalem in a future agreement with the Palestinians. All right, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu met with the leaders of the V4 countries of Hungary, Poland, Slovakia, and the Czech Republic yesterday. And it looks like all of the countries are on the same page when it comes to radical Islam and the EU. Following his successful meeting with Netanyahu on Tuesday, the Hungarian Prime Minister praised Israel for its effect on the stability of the Middle East.
Az Európai Uniónak értékelnie kellene azokat az erőfeszítéseket, amelyeket Izrael állam tesz a térség stabilitása érdekében, és amely nem csak izraeli, hanem európai érdek is, mert véd bennünket az újabb és újabb migráns inváziótól.
It appears that Netanyahu is eager to cooperate with the Central European V4 countries on common threats.
I suggested that we have, as Prime Minister Orban said, a working group on how to work together to cooperate in this battle against terrorism, the spread of militant Islamic terrorism to the world. I believe that we can do a lot more together than separately.
Israel and the V4 don't just share security concerns, they also have shared values of democracy, free markets, and a general skepticism to the European Union. In fact, in a revealing moment, Netanyahu was caught on a hot mic sharing his thoughts on the EU with the V4 countries. He said that Europe has to decide if it wants to live and thrive or if it wants to shrivel and disappear, and asked for help from his new allies in moderating the EU's crazy policy toward Israel. Reportedly, the next V4 summit will not be in Central Europe, but in Israel.
The Israeli government has just announced that there are no official plans to change the law on allowing gay couples to adopt a child in Israel. ILTV's Emmanuel Kadosh reports.
In response to a high court petition asking to allow common law couples and same-sex couples to adopt, the government said that allowing same-sex couples to adopt would place an, quote, additional burden on the child. Therefore, they are opposing to change the law. The government wrote to the court that, quote, the professional opinion of the Child Welfare Service supports preserving the existing situation, which only allows a man and a woman to adopt a child. The government says that, quote, it takes into account the reality of Israeli society, i.e. the huge LGBT community in Israel, and yet they still choose to leave the law as is. Many lawmakers, such as Meretz's Michal Rozin, who heads the Knesset's LGBT lobby, as well as Yael German of Yesh Atid, and many more, said in a statement that, quote, this is a foolish and discriminatory decision that is accompanied by the unprecedented homophobia. They continued on to say the Israeli government is again abandoning the gay community, and this highlights government's cynical use of the community. In English, they boast about being a gay-friendly country, but in Hebrew, they deny basic rights.
All right, guys, the 20th annual Maccabiah Games have finally come to an end, and participants from across the world all agree that it was a great experience, from the food to the camaraderie. The Jewish Olympics bring in thousands of athletes from the Jewish diaspora from all four corners of the world every 4 years. Last night, the closing ceremony for the Games was a star-studded affair, with even Israeli supermodel Bar Rafaeli hosting the event. The crowd was enthralled by the fireworks, the dancers and light show, and the Israeli covers of pop hits like Uptown Funk. Unsurprisingly, Israel and the United States were the big winners at the Games, but the Cuban Jews did bring home a bronze medal, and the Hungarian Jews got 2 golds. Olympic gold medalist and swimmer Jason Lezak joined Team USA as a Maccabi ambassador, and he's had an emotional experience at the event.
The together part comes as your country, but then the together part comes as the people here as a whole. We're all Jewish people, and I think a lot of people realize that and celebrate that. And even though they're competing, they're still meeting great friends for life. And to be able to compete only against Jewish athletes makes it really special.
Now, mid-heat wave, more than 60,000 fans still gathered together last night to watch music legends Guns N' Roses rock out hard in Tel Aviv's Hayakon Park for a crazy 3 hours. ILTV's Emmanuel Kadosh reports.
Lead singer Axl Rose spent the majority of the continuous 3 hours dashing across the stage and tossing the microphone stand, reminding people how and why he's been one of the kings of rock for 3+ decades. This got a bit too crazy when 27-year-old woman just couldn't contain herself. The woman slipped and fell while attempting to climb on stage to, I guess, get a closer look. Yet in no shock due to the heat wave, she was not the only one to be treated in the massive event. Magen David Adom paramedics treated around 65 people during the concert who suffered from fainting, dehydration, weakness, or bruising from all the jumping, then falling, then jumping again. Regardless of the fact that the Guns N' Roses show was the largest concert to date here in the Holy Land, the Not in a Lifetime tour is also the highest grossing tour this year, pulling in over $151 million in the first 6 months of 2017, as well as beating out Justin Bieber and U2. Now that's impressive. I'm sure this one will be a concert we'll hear about for years to come.
When you fly El Al, you might notice how great the in-flight news service is, or how attentive the flight crew members are. But El Al passengers are now in for some surprises when it comes to the in-flight meals, too. That's right, El Al has expanded its in-flight menus to include 15 new options designed to accommodate the various health needs and preferences of its customers. From vegan and vegetarian options to gluten-free and low-sodium meals, there's something for everyone. Best of all, the meals have been designed by Israeli chefs like Einat Mazor and Ishai Harai, and they're all about incorporating seasonal and natural ingredients. In short, it's a long way away from a bag of peanuts and a stiff cocktail. On a final note though, despite all the new options to choose from, of course all El Al's in-flight options are kosher, so you won't be getting a ham sandwich from the cart anytime soon, even if it's gluten-free.
The British band Radiohead just played a concert in Tel Aviv last night, and it's almost as if they were trying to send a message to the BDS movement by holding their longest show in 11 years. Deep into the show, frontman Tom York even said, "We ain't done yet. We came all the way here. We're gonna play our fingers off." 47,000 fans crammed into the concert space to return the love, and tens of thousands more could be seen crowding the grassy park beyond the gates for a free listen. The past few months leading up to last night's performance have been marked by a public feud between Radiohead and prominent BDS supporter and Pink Floyd band member Roger Waters. Waters called on the band to boycott Israel and cancel their show, to which Radiohead frontman Tom York sparingly replied that he was insulted at the assumption they couldn't make their own decisions over where to play. In a more recent comment, York further defended the show, saying that playing in Israel is no more a statement in support of Netanyahu and the Israeli government than it would be in support of Trump if and when they play in America. Then in last night's show, York said simply, "A lot of stuff was said about this. In the end, we played some music." The set list last night was 27 tracks long, the second longest in the band history, and ended with an extended and powerful rendition of their 1997 hit Karma Police. That's it for this week's Roundup. Tune in next Friday for our next episode of This Week in Israel. I'm Natasha Kirchuk, and thanks for joining us from Tel Aviv.